So my name is Judy Gargaro, and I'm the ABI Program Director at the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. And thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. There's magic in the mix. Couple of housekeeping items just before I do the formal introduction of our speakers. Kristen Riley, who you will see on the screen, she will be monitoring the Q&A over the course of this webinar. So if you have any questions, put those questions in there. We will be disabling the chat. So that will be your way to communicate with Kristen. And she's also tech support. If you need any tech support, she's going to look after all of that. The webinar is being recorded and it will be shared afterwards. And of course, don't forget that there will be an evaluation survey that will be sent at the end. And we really appreciate it if you could fill that out, because that helps the speakers, but it also helps us in terms of planning future webinars and future activities. So it gives me really great pleasure to introduce Leslie Birkett and Deidre Sperry. They're going to give more detailed introduction for themselves, but I've known them for quite a long time, and to use Dee's phrase, they have lots of dirt under their nails when it comes to working with folks who have brain injury. The reason Kristen and I approached them to do this is that we're on a mission to make evidence and guidelines real for people and how they can apply it to their practice. And so I look forward to a very practical, real talk from Leslie and Dee. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Judy. Okay. I will just pull up. There, can everybody see what I hope they're looking at?
All right, thanks, Steve. So we'd like to begin by welcoming you to this webinar. There's magic in the mix, combining occupational therapy and speech-language pathology in community-based interventions for traumatic brain injury. So this webinar was initiated by the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. And if you aren't familiar with them, following the webinar, do check out their best practice guidelines. And we are grateful to the Ontario Society of Occupational Therapists and the Ontario Association of Speech-Language Pathologists and Audiologists for their support of this webinar. Next slide, please. So we'd like to introduce ourselves, and I'd like to begin by introducing my colleague and friend, Deidre Sperry. Dee is a practicing speech pathologist, and she was a member of the expert panel for the development of our college's preferred practice guidelines for cognitive communication disorders. She teaches the Ontario Brain Injury Association Level 1 Neurorehabilitation course, and she's also an assistant clinical professor adjunct with the School of Speech-Language Pathology at McMaster University. I wanted to add and share what I like about working with speech pathologists. I've learned so much about the nuances of conversation and the various skills needed to successfully manage different communication exchanges. So things I never would have thought of before, things like being involved in a cocktail party or a phone tree or comparison shopping. I've learned about both comprehension and expression of ideas through reading and writing. And I've also learned about social pragmatics. And I think from our joint discussions, whoops,
Sorry.
From our joint, that's okay.
Sorry, let me just a sec. I don't know what happened.
Yep. No problem.
That was weird.
That was weird. This is technology for you with modern day glitches.
Yeah. We go from the big meringue. Okay.
I'll just finish my sentence while Dee pulls that back up. I think that from our joint discussions, I've also further expanded my knowledge regarding executive functioning. And when Dee pulls it up, she will continue.
Oh, this is such fun.
Grace under pressure.
This is jolly good because the share feature has just evaporated from the
I can, would you like I can share your slides if
Sure,
That'd be
let's give
helpful.
that a
Okay.
try because mine just suddenly decided it doesn't want to play.
okay.
So if you just go back to that same second slide, that would be
Sure.
great. Thanks, Kristen.
Perfect. Alrighty. So there we go.
That's the real world.
All right. There. Does
Thank
that
you.
work?
Perfect.
So Leslie, did you want to say why you like working with me again, or did you want me to just take over?
I think you can just jump right in.
Okay, well, I would like to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Leslie Birkett. And Leslie is an occupational therapist. And well, she has clocked a few kilometers over the years as well. She's been practicing for around 30 years and that she has tons and tons of experience. And with that experience, she is a longtime participant at the McMaster School of Rehabilitation Science in the OT department. And she too is an assistant clinical professor, adjunct position in the School of OT. More recently, she has also become the occupational therapy hub member for a Project ECHO concussion program offering education broadly through the University Health Network. Leslie is passionate about occupational therapy and has taken her knowledge, experience, and me to different developing countries around the world to help them advance in their skills in helping people with disabilities to live better lives. And I think that our work in understanding the real world has really helped in some of our efforts in doing this volunteer work that Leslie was so instrumental in bringing to our clinical relationship. Now, I love working with Leslie and my other OT colleagues because OTs have taught me how important it is to broaden my view. So instead of just looking down like the communication telescope, OTs have taught me to broaden my view and to take things into consideration that I might not have considered prior to working more closely with OTs. They've taught me to evaluate the person within the context of where they are, who they are, what they do, and for me to evaluate the communication within the context of their full environment. And truthfully, I'm always rather flattered when an OT will give me feedback saying, Dee, I think you're a closet OT.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So today's workshop goals are that by the end of the webinar, you will have learned how to develop collaborative, functionally oriented cognitive rehabilitation programs that help clients to better deal with the demands of everyday life. And also by the end of today's webinar, you will have learned about cross-discipline collaboration between OT and SLP to best provide service to moderate to severely injured, brain injured individuals. And now we're going to we want to find out who is here participating with us today. And so Kristen, could you launch the poll? Thank you, there it is. If you wouldn't mind, please taking a second to make your choice and then click submit.
Maybe I should close that.
We've got over 90%. Yep, we've got over 90% of people voted. Maybe give you another 15 seconds to please state your role.
Vote now, vote often.
All right, I will end it. We've got 95% voted. And sharing the results.
There we go. So we've got a whole bunch of OTs, which is great. And then almost 20% speech pathologists, students, social worker, support workers, and other. Okay, well, that gives us a little glimpse into who is joining us with us today. So thank you for that. All right, we can close the poll, and thank you, Kristen, and do the next slide. All right, so we wanted to begin today with remembering the real world, because for all of us, it has been way too long since we've done anything other than read, watch Netflix, bake, do a puzzle, or go for a walk with a friend. Do we even remember what it was like to go to the movies on a Saturday night? Probably most of us are looking at that picture and feeling a little bit like we want to push everyone apart and wondering where their masks are because it's been so long. Well, the real world, as we know, it's busy and confusing. It's interactive and it's unpredictable and complex. And we just really haven't experienced that in the past year. So we're looking forward to jumping back into that over the next number of months. And the real world requires us to manage in novel situations on a regular basis. So this takes intact executive functioning, because executive functions are used when we're faced with situations that are new to us. So not when we get dressed day after day, but when we're in a new situation, our executive functioning kicks in. And this is why the real world is important, because if we think about our patients, we know that when assessments of executive functioning are completed in the quiet confines of a clinic or office, there's a risk in missing the important dynamic interplay and unpredictability that real life offers. We also know that some people who test well on standardized assessments of executive functioning can still be challenged when managing complex tasks of daily living. And finally, independence in daily functioning requires the navigation of complex environments and increasingly complex information systems, making intact executive functioning paramount to survival. Next slide, please.
So over the decades, our different professions have been evolving, and we've been becoming more and more specialized. Within our specialization, we have made some very niche areas for ourselves and carved out different territories of vocation. I mean, really, that within our individual professions, we have specialization for the specialists. So not only might I be a specialist in communication as a speech pathologist, but I might also have a specialty in swallowing or cognitive communication disorders. And this is not what we're talking about today. For our talk today, we are focusing on collaboration in the community for people living with brain injury. So we need something that's a little bit different than what it might look like in the hospital. That when Leslie and I first were working together many years ago, at the hospital, the disciplines were organized down different halls. That's not what we're talking about here. Leslie set the stage on the last slide about how complex the real world is. Even something like going to the movies or going grocery shopping takes an integrated set of skills to be employed. If we look then at something even more complex, like fixing a snowmobile or starting your own company or putting together IKEA furniture, even more complex integration of skills is required. So if this is the kind of activity that is being promoted, that we work with people in the contexts of their everyday lives, then we need a model that's going to help us be able to meet the needs of the situation. We need the lines to get a little bit blurry between our vocational territories, but yet have all of us still pulling together in the same direction. I chose this picture of my son's rowing team as an illustration because their first race was an example of not collaborating. Each one of these boys had trained really hard over the winter, and they're pulling on their ergs, and they all had awesome times. They were as buff as they'd ever been. They were feeling so strong. So when they got out on the water for their full race, for their first race, they were ready. They were chomping at the bit to win. And all 4 of them pulled as hard as they could. Well, their boat it did not make a straight line. They were hitting each other's oars all over the place. It was not pretty. And at the end of the race that they didn't win, they were all really quite ticked off with each other. Even though they were all in the same boat, they weren't working together. So they soon learned what it means to collaborate. They needed a model that would help them pull at the same force with the same timing in the same direction in order to win. And in the end, they did win. And so I thought, what if we were to use this same model for our work here? I put a definition on this slide as well, that interdisciplinary collaboration is defined as a complex phenomena that is often formed between 2 or more people from various professional fields to achieve common goals. True, it is, but it doesn't speak to that pulling together and pulling to win. Years ago, Mark Ilvasacker said something that really stuck with us. And it was with regard to evaluation of executive functioning. And he said that what we really do is that we assess people in the best of environments and then expect them to function in the worst. And as I said, this really stuck with us. And so now that we start looking at community-based intervention, I started to kind of scratch my head and think, well, what we're doing is just a little bit perverse, that we take these complex tasks like going to the movies, like doing the grocery shopping, like fixing the snowmobile, starting your own company, and we break these tasks down into manageable bite-sized pieces that we can manage from within our own vocational territory. And then we expect the person with the brain injury to somehow magically pull it all together again. Well, what if we didn't do it that way? What if we just worked together from the get-go? Would that be possible for us to work like this rowing team? And if so, how do you go about it? Next slide, please. So it all starts at the assessment. And in Mark Ilvasacker and Tim Feeney's book, Collaborative Brain Injury Intervention, Positive Everyday Routines, they go into detail about how we can practice in a more collaborative way. And they say that this should start right at the assessment. The first and foremost, if you can click, please, Kristen. First and foremost, we need to be collaborating with the individual who has the disability, and they need to be part of the assessment. And that the role that they play in this is that they tell us what's important. They tell us where they find the meaning. They tell us where they see their strengths and weaknesses. And so their participation is at the heart of our work. Next. Tim and Mark were an interdisciplinary dynamic duo, and they wrote that for ideal outcomes, we need our individual professions, yes, but we need to acknowledge what we're not. We need to acknowledge the specialties that other people bring to this team. And moreover, we need to celebrate where those overlaps are, not get into territorial spats. Next. And that when we recognize the importance of these overlaps, we need that so that when we look at executive functions in the real world, we're going to be able to help the person achieve their goals because we're all integrated together. And they propose that we should be completing our documentation together in a cross-discipline manner. Next, please. And that by doing so, we're going to be able to help people function in their real-world environments. Next. And so this documentation is done in a cross-collaboration way so that we can all be on the same page. And finally, we need to remember that the skills that we're teaching people, that we're going to do that within the context of where they're going to be using these skills. So these ideas need to come straight out of the gate of how to work collaboratively in the real world. Next. Whoops. And okay, yes. And it was like we would if we were in that boat. So we looked at some other literature that was maybe a little bit more recent. Mark Ilvesacker passed away, so there hasn't been more research. So we looked to Scandinavia, and there were some common themes that kept coming back. And in some of this research, they talk about everyday rehabilitation, and that's what we would call community-based intervention. And in this model, they found that when teams had a mutual sharing of knowledge, so all players had all the information, that they got, that the teams felt that they worked better together and that they were able to achieve the goals that they set out. They also had this acceptance and respect of every team member as being an essential player on the team. And, you know, I must challenge us that do we know all of the members on our treatment teams? Do we know the names and have relationships with the PSWs who spend an awful lot of time with our clients? Do we have the names and understand the roles of the therapy support workers? So we have to have a respect for every member of the team. They also found that development of team goals, as opposed to just vocational goals, so speech goals, that was actually key in meeting them. Imagine that if we wrote the goal in a way that focused on the collaboration, we were more likely to meet that goal for our client. Next bullet. And that if we had a shared mindset of collaboration, focusing on everyday rehabilitation, that having just that shared idea that we're in it together, that made a difference in the programs that we offered. Next. So I go back to our Venn diagram of the meringue, because it's not important which one of us is chomping down on this ever so big meringue. What's important is the meringue. And so if we look at the Venn diagram, I know you can't see the words in the Venn diagram because really they don't matter. On the left, we have the OT and in the gold. And we have the general areas of expertise that OTs bring to the team. We also, in the red, we have the areas of expertise that a speech pathologist would bring. Who cares? What's interesting is where the orange is. And that's the client's goals. And that's what matters. That's starting in at a client-centered perspective. So what if we were to just talk about it differently? What if we were to start with orange and start with goals that talked about going to school, about going to work, about going to parties with your friends, about being able to go to the doctor's office by yourself, to be able to go to the movies? And what if we said, hey, I know I got something that could help out in this scenario from my red circle. And my colleague says, hey, I've got some ideas from my yellow circle. Let's see how we can all pull together. And we're going to just give that a little try right now. Oops, no, we're not. I forgot about this slide. Could we add more disciplines in? Yes, we can. So we have put PT, but that could very well have been, that could be psychotherapy, that could be psychological therapy, that could be physiotherapy. It doesn't matter. I mean, it could be social work. It could be whoever we have. We could add more colors because that's how the rainbow works. What's important is that white zone is the meaningful activities related to community, family, work, and self. Now we'll give it a try.
All right. So when we, let's look at what we see when we're working together. So together, when we're working with a client, and this is the orange, just like on the last slide, we ask questions about real life, and we aim to find out where the person's struggling, how they're struggling, and of course, what's important to them. And in this example, our client wants to plant a garden to have fresh vegetables for the summer months. And she has a goal of making herself a beautiful kale salad using her own ingredients. So if we slip over to the yellow side, what I as an occupational therapist see in this, well, I see that she needs help to plan the garden. And we know that planning is a complex and multi-step process. We also want to consider what plants she might want, and remind her that her goal is to make this kale salad and she wants to grow all the ingredients for it. She'll need to think about where she wants to plant the garden in order to get the best sunlight. And we might make a mind map to consider all the steps necessary to construct the garden. She'll need to consider the cost and make a budget for the plants, the soil, the fertilizer, any tools she might need. And she might need help to compromise and prioritize if she can't afford it all. She'll also need to consider her fatigue and how to pace the task, and that includes not just building and getting it started, but the care required over the summer months to weed, water, and maintain the garden. And now Dee's going to share what she might look at when she sees this situation.
So when I see this orange goal of wanting to have the kale salad that she grew herself, I think, hey, let's read that book about sun requirements for different plants. Let's go to the garden store and talk to the plant dude about garden, about different soils and the fertilizer, collect information so that our client can learn from the professional at the garden store. Maybe she wants to attend a garden lecture in the spring about, so you want to have a garden this summer. And we're going to work on compensatory strategies within the context of going to a lecture. Or maybe we're going to listen to podcasts from Mark Cullen with all of the information that you need about being able to plant a garden.
Next slide, please. All right, so now that we've gone through one sample project, we want your help to consider another project. We want you to think about helping your client host their 5-year-old son's birthday party and using the annotation features. So to find them, if you look to the top of your screen, you'll see where it says view options, and it's in a black bar right beside the green one that says Kristen sharing her screen. You're going to click that, and on the drop down menu, you'll see annotate. So you're going to choose this and then choose text to type. And we'd like you to start adding to the slide what you would consider both the skills needed to make this party a success and the things that you might need to think about as someone helping your client plan this birthday party. I'll give you a couple of minutes to work on that.
I could start.
I have a couple raised hands. I'm wondering if perhaps they do not have that function. That's what's
okay.
That might be blocked in the webinar setting, unfortunately, for participants. Even though we trialed this, it might have been because we were all, yeah.
Oh,
can you, that was me doing that. Can you share that so that they can annotate? Yeah,
I'm trying to allow those,
Yeah.
allow everyone, it says that everyone should be, like it doesn't, it says annotation is possible, but I'm just wondering if perhaps just that it's only between the panelists and the hosts.
Okay,
All right. Whoops.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No
that's okay.
problem.
It's the real world. This is what
Can
we
we-
do. We roll with the punches.
Thanks for trying, everyone. Sorry about that.
Can we, then can people unmic and just add? Is there another way to get people to add?
I could either open up the chat or allow people or unmute. What do you think would be better?
Whatever you want.
I think opening up the chat would be better
Okay.
because then people
Okay.
can simultaneously respond.
Perfect.
Right.
That's great. Thank you.
And I will type.
Okay.
Oh, good idea.
Okay, so everyone should be able to access the chat now. If you're able to fill in your comments about,
Perfect.
here we go.
Woo.
Ooh.
They were just, they were sitting and waiting. They're so excited to participate. Okay, so this is going faster than I can type.
I'm typing some too. Declaration.
Do you want me to read some out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you slipped back. Yeah.
There we go. Make a guest list, noise tolerance, plan food. Can I have a party during COVID? Create a guest list, decor, number of children or guests. What's the budget? Time, date, location of party. Ordering or making a cake. Weekend or weekday, food and drink considerations, types of activities at the party, thinking about the noise level of the group, thinking about how to invite people, pacing strategies, before, during, after, follow up with RSVPs, lots of great feedback.
Yeah, that is great.
So if we look at this, so there's no such thing as just a party for a 5-year-old. We have to, like, there's a lot to consider. This is a really complex activity, looking at how are you going to invite the guests? What is your tolerance for the noise that 5-year-olds bring to a party? What is your budget? So you can see how once we have these kind of orange, we should have been writing in orange, but how we have the orange activities, well, now we can go to town and we can say, hey, I have an idea about this that fits with my training and my knowledge base.
Awesome. All right. Do you want to save that for us, Kristen, and then erase it, and then we'll move on to the next slide?
All right, got it saved and moving on.
Thank you. So that was great. Thank you all for all your suggestions and ideas. And again, like Dee said, lots of different things that go into it. And you can see why when we look at one activity, hosting a 5-year-old's birthday party, there's so many different things to think about and how so many different members of the team might have something to add to this. But if this is our client's goal, that's what we want to focus on. So we wanted to share a story now about, how we collaborate. And when we're working with a client, we don't necessarily start right out of the gate with collaborating. We do move this way over time, and we do that, as Dee mentioned, by starting with sharing our assessment results to get the dialogue moving. And sometimes I have clients who don't want to have their assessments results shared between different providers. And of course, then that's my job to explain why that's advantageous and hopefully clear that up. So as we work to help the person develop strategies, it's really critical for ongoing collaboration so that the strategies are streamlined and coordinated. We don't want so many strategies in place that the person becomes overwhelmed and they can't implement any of them. Because remember that learning strategies is new learning, and this of course takes time, and we need to focus on taking small coordinated steps to best help our client. So we wanted to share a story of a client we worked with and how we tailored strategies that were implemented over time and how these strategies were applied to different scenarios. So for this fellow, and we'll call him Greg, we used strategies tailored to organization. We used mind maps with him. We used pre-planning, fatigue management, and delegation. Those were some of the strategies that we used. So I'm going to share how I helped this fellow, Greg, plan his annual family trip to Florida. So initially, we organized the trip by thinking of all the steps that would be necessary to successfully get to Florida. And we focused on that because that had been the hardest part of the whole excursion for him. And typically by the time he got to Florida, he was wrecked and he would spend the next couple of days in bed. So we used a mind map to consider all of the different things that he would need to do to get ready to go and to organize the information. So for example, one category was documents. So we had things like plane tickets, checking passports, condo reservation, that type of thing. Pre-planning for him was really critical. And for him, he started his packing list well in advance and started to pack. And there was no reason not to do that because nobody needs to wear shorts in February in Ontario. So he was able to, put those things into his bag. Fatigue management included getting to bed early the night before, and this was why it was so critical that his packing started, because in previous years we learned he was up till midnight packing, throwing stuff in left, right, and center. And the reason this was important was they always took the same flight, and he had to get up at 4 a.m. to catch the flight. So it was important that he be packed and ready to go early. And then the delegation part for him included asking one of his adult children to drive from the airport in Florida to the condo. And this broke the task up so that he didn't need to do all of the steps. And now Dee's going to share how she used the exact same strategies with this fellow to plan his son's stag.
So when I met with Greg, now we weren't working on these at exactly the same time. That I was able to say to Greg when he came to me and told me that he wanted to host his son's stag and doe, that he was kind of scared to do it, but it was really something really important. So we were able to have the discussion that said, okay, how are you going to do this? How are you going to approach this party? And he'd already had these great experiences with finding strategies that worked. And so in the words of Mark Ilvasacker, we're going to stick with winners and dump losers. So why don't we just use the strategies in a different context that he developed in his work with Leslie? So we used a mind map to plan out the party. That just like we kind of just did with our annotation exercise, is that we made the mind map looking at renting of the hall and trying to price check the different halls, looking how you're going to have the party catered, who's going to get all the prizes that you're going to sell the tickets for, so we had the whole mind map of what's involved in this great big party. Then we used a different kind of a checklist, but a checklist all the same, and a timeline with prioritizing activities across like a Gantt chart or something of that nature, so that we could again use some of the strategies that he'd already learned with Leslie. And so we helped him keep track of things as he went. And along the lines of this delegating the jobs, he kind of viewed himself as the guy who should be able to do all this, but alas, he was kind of stuck, and it was hard for him to have some of these conversations with people about 27 different things that you'd have to do at a party. So he again, used the strategy of delegation and said, okay, you family member, could you be in charge of selling the tickets? Could you be in charge of making sure that the food goes out clearly and that he was really the hub of information? And then that way he had enough gas in the tank so that he could then have conversations with the people at the party when they were giving him the congratulations, I'm so happy that your son is getting married. And so again, he was able to build on successes from the strategies that he initiated with Leslie and just practice in a different context to participate in a role that was really important to him. Next. So if we go back to Mark and Tim's idea about collaborative documentation and focusing intervention on functional everyday rehabilitation, it's gas, but the goal attainment scale is a tool that really stands up for this job. And the goal attainment scale is a method of charting progress that focuses on an individual's goals, provides a metacognitive map as to where we're headed, is evidence-based, and allows for interdisciplinary collaboration and documentation. Next. So the goal attainment scale has been around for a long time, but it kind of in and out of rehab style, if you will. But it has stood the test of time. It was developed first in 1968. So that's even longer than Leslie and I have been practicing. And the goal attainment scale is a criterion referenced tool rather than a norm referenced tool. And so this allows us to be responsive to clinically significant details that might be otherwise missed if we use an impairment style tool. So research has shown that if we have 2, maybe 3 goals, client goals, context goals, individualized goals, but have 2, maybe 3 goals at a time, that works best because otherwise you don't know where you're headed, I think, anymore, and things start to get a little bit hairy. So it doesn't matter if the goal is something that is very concrete, like grocery shopping for our friend here in the picture, or if it's something that is kind of just a more ubiquitous and appears everywhere. So maybe it's something, the goal is keeping your cool when people tick you off, that we can have that kind of goal mapped out onto a goal attainment scale as well. So the basis of this tool is it starts out at a level -1 is your beginning. And so that would be where you state the current state of affairs. And that is, we're at this less than expected outcome. And you describe it. You take your time to word it well. And there are certain ways of wording a GAS goal. Some are more prescriptive than others. And, you know, the bottom line is you want to have it to be a SMART type of goal. And then you say, if things were to get a little bit better with intervention, where would we hit? What is the expected outcome after intervention? And then you would get to go up to a level 0. But what if you were to say, okay, what would just a little bit better look like if it was even greater than expected? And then what would it look like if it was much greater than expected? And so these are great clinical conversations to have with your client to say, okay, so what if you were to do it in this way, and maybe we monkey with the frequency, with the duration, with the with all the different ingredients, the environment, but we help to develop these goals. But we also have to have the -2. And that is what happens if things get a little bit worse. So with this 5-point scale, we can all be working together. Next slide, please. And the next click. Whoops. Okay, better. So what if we were to say that right now, Jessica, she goes to the store with a plan and that she has to leave before getting all the items she came for. So that's the where we're at currently, is that she has this plan. She's going to go do her grocery shopping, but it all falls apart and she has to leave. And so if we were to introduce some interventions and say that, you know, a 0 would look like Jessica has a plan of how she's going to get the groceries she needs. She uses one strategy with external cueing from the TSW and is able to get the items that she set out to get. And if things got a little bit better than what we expect, is that Jessica has a plan of how she's going to get the groceries she needs. She uses one strategy without instruction from anybody, but needs external cues to include more than one strategy and is able to get most of the items that she set out to get. But if she was to kind of hit it out of the park, is that Jessica has her plan of how she's going to get the groceries she needs. She has a full range of strategy, doesn't use any external cues, and is able to get all the items that she intends to get. But again, we say, what if things went kind of sour one day? And that's the -2, and that Jessica goes to the store without a plan and she has to leave without getting any of the things that she came in for. So within this context, everybody on the team can be contributing to what they can bring to the party to help Jessica meet her goal of getting the groceries for her family's dinner. Next.
So you'll notice up until this point in time, we were talking about the real world, and we wanted to include some information about brain training because brain training, of course, is not the real world. And I've got some links to some research articles on the slide. And at present, brain training is not supported to improve functioning. And that's what we're talking about in this presentation, is functioning. From the Stanford Center on Longevity, they stated that there's little evidence that playing brain games improves underlying broad cognitive abilities, or that it enables one to better navigate complex realm of everyday life. Again, complex activities require executive functioning. So research has shown some limited improvements in certain areas of cognitive functioning. However, the specific tools and length of training are not known. A recent 2019 article published in Human Neurosciences that examined 2 studies with over 60,000 participants found some improvements in global function, working memory, and verbal memory after several months of training. However, the duration of the training regime was quite a bit longer than in previous studies. So studies conclude that the individual may see improvements on a specific game or app, but how to link that to real life is not presently known. So when we're using brain training games, we need to think that we're asking an individual with a brain injury to try and pull it together by linking this information from the game to the real world. And that, of course, is pretty challenging. Next slide, please. So the real world doesn't mean that you need to go out into it during every session, rather that your treatment focuses on real world activities and how to engage in them. So for example, with our client Greg, Dee didn't go to the stag, and unfortunately I did not get a free trip to Florida. So consider the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation guideline that's on the screen in front of you. And this is from their guideline for adults with moderate to severe TBI. So they identify that metacognitive strategy instructions like goal management training, plan, do, check, review, and prediction performance should be used with individuals with traumatic brain injury for difficulty with problem solving, planning, and organization. Common elements of all metacognitive strategies are self-monitoring and incorporation of feedback into future performance. These strategies should be focused on everyday problems and functional outcomes of personal relevance to the person. And we've spoken a lot about that during the presentation today. So the guideline directs us to consider everyday functional activities. And I really want to highlight the self-monitoring and feedback. This goes back to Dee's slide where she talked about functional activities that don't go well. We all make many mistakes when we're learning, and our job is to help our client look back at the problem, break it down, build in strategies, and try again. Our job is not to abandon the activity. So when a client of mine had a horrible time at a grocery store, we did just that, and we broke it down, and I learned that she was shopping at an unfamiliar grocery store. She was shopping at a time that was busy. She was in a grocery store that had really narrow aisles, and the tile pattern on the floor triggered her visual symptoms. So by breaking it down, we were able to figure out what the problems were and develop a go-forward plan. And then we can look at new and other complex situations. And remember that as a clinician, it's really important to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that needs to link directly to your client's goals. So our goal isn't to simply keep documenting that the person can't do something. That's relatively easy, but to help them move forwards in this new life of theirs. Next slide, please. So how do we construct meaningful intervention? And what are the steps? Well, you can see on the slide, the first step is to develop individualized and meaningful goals that are specific to the person. So this means that the goal is identified specifically for that client, tailored to their skills and their home and their environment that they're going to use those skills in. And next, it's important to look at goals that focus on participation in life roles that are meaningful and relevant to the person. You want to ensure that you have clearly articulated goals so that you and the client know where you're going, and ideally you know when you reach your destination. So this goes back to the making sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. And you want to ensure that the person has adequate opportunity to practice skills, because remember that we all make mistakes, so we need adequate time to practice in order to learn. We want to make sure we provide opportunities for integration of supports and the use of strategies, and this is where the GAS goals can come in. And finally, we want to make sure there's opportunity for self-reflection and evaluation, because this is where the learning happens. When we talk about looking at what's working and what's not, and Dee's already mentioned this, but I think it's important to say again that Ilvasacker and Feeney talk about sticking with winners and giving away losers. So we need to stick with things that work and change, tweak, modify things that weren't going that well. Next slide, please. So how do we construct collaborative interventions? And to illustrate this, Dee and I wanted to share the story of a 41-year-old client of ours who's a former high school teacher. So we'll call her Valerie, and she was unable to return to teaching, and this was a huge blow to her. Productivity is of major importance to her, and she wants to model this for her children. So whereas the initial OT treatment focused on independence in personal care and learning about fatigue management, which continues to be important years later, initial speech treatment focused on information processing, concentration, and verbal expression. And as she progressed, we shifted away from the personal care. She and I started looking at household tasks, and then we started looking at leisure tasks. And we began to consider things like socializing and writing. We looked at carving out time to fit these meaningful activities into her week. And she actually located an online blog that was in line with her personal interests, and she offered them some limited free editing. And this proved to be a great confidence boost to her and sparked the next exciting phase of her rehab. So she began taking art classes, and then she joined a local writers group, and she's participated in monthly meetings. And in this format, she's provided with direct feedback from her peers. And we know from the literature, and this again is Ilvasacker and Feeney, that including everyday people in rehab improves effectiveness and outcomes. So now she has a small book of self-illustrated short stories that she's prepared. And through a connection I provided her with a local writer who's disabled, she's looking at finding a suitable writing coach and editor to finalize her work. Her writing remains a current goal, and what she's looking to in the future is to be able to participate in conferences to look at how to promote and share her work. And at the present time during therapy sessions, either Dee or I might address issues that arise in her art class or with her writing, because we've collaborated so closely that either of us is able to address any glitches that occur and assist her with tailoring strategies. Next slide, please. And so what are the takeaway messages? Well, collaboration is the magic, and it's way more fun. It's the functional, meaningful goals of the client that are important. And common elements of all metacognitive strategies are self-monitoring and incorporation of feedback into future performance. These strategies should be focused on everyday problems and functional outcomes of personal relevance to the person. And by both of us working together, it allows our client to have more practice and more feedback. And as C.S. Lewis said, 2 heads are better than 1, not because either is infallible, but because they're unlikely to go wrong in the same direction. And you can remove the slideshow.
Well, thank you very much, Leslie and Deirdre. There's a couple of questions. The first one, the goal attainment scaling example seems double-barreled. Example, client has a plan and uses X strategies. How do you score if only partially achieved? Example, completes one part of the goal.
Well, I would think that if they only, it's, you know, I can understand that where there's so many complexities in this example. And that's where sometimes the rewriting of the goal and writing the goal collaboratively. I think that when we work together as health professionals, we can script out, we can not script, but we can create those goals so that we aren't making the double barrel comment. But I think that if we start to unravel them too finely, is we mix that interplay of complexity that simply going to the grocery store requires. So they may be a 0 for a long time because there's one element of this big goal that hasn't been addressed. And so together we're going to all be pulling together to maybe target in that you got to be using these strategies more reliably, or whatever I've forgotten the glitch that we hit with the example. Leslie, do you?
No, I think that's great. Yep.
Okay, one other question, and this is a biggie. How do you, well, because it's something we've all had challenges with, how do you develop goals for someone who has low motivation / insight / apathy?
So that is an excellent question. So I can start and then Dee, you can add. And yeah, this certainly comes up with this population and other populations. And I think one of the key things is really breaking the goal down so that it is so small and starting small. Because we always say we're trying to plan for success, not failure. So, you know, the person may tell you that they want to go back to work and they're a million miles from it. And that's where our job and our skills come in to help break that down and what's the next step. We talk about this a lot also in the echo concussion program that's running, because, for example, we know that exercise is really critical, and you know, some people are just not motivated to get exercising. And so to look at, okay, how far do you think you can walk? And if the person says they can walk 10 minutes, then we set the goal as being, okay, we're going to go for 5 minutes a day. We want something that's really achievable, that the person finds success in, so that then we can build from there. And I think the reality is, you know, all of our clients, if we have enough discussion, there's something that they want to change, even with limited insight. Like the limited insight might prevent them from being aware of their memory problems or being aware of their executive function challenges, but they're aware that they've been fired from 4 jobs in a row, for example. So there's, you know, there's something that we can attach from a functional perspective and break it down really small. Did you want to add to that, Dee?
I think that that's exact is that by working on the client's goals and listening carefully, you know, listening with your heart as to what they really want, because they might be saying, you know, I want my life back. Thank you very much. And so those are some conversations that need to go down. But when we finally can come up with the something that they want, and we say, whoa, you're in, I'm in, that's where we're headed. And maybe it starts by going for a walk every day. Maybe you can incorporate using different strategies to remind you for going for the walk every day. Maybe you can, you know, there's all kinds of different ideas, but by focusing on that orange bit, it's going to get there, because we're not telling them what to do. We're saying, hey, I think I have an idea of how I might help that orange goal work.
Well, thank you very much. We don't have any other questions and we're at time. So thank you. Thank you both to Leslie and Deirdre for their great talk today. There were a couple of people who wanted confirmation of their attendance, and so Kristen will happily send an email to that effect. There were some people who wanted the links, and we can include that in the email that we send out. So it will be recorded, and Kristen will make that recording available to let you know when we've got it housed so you can hear it. She's included the link in the chat for the evaluation questionnaire. So please go ahead and do that. And if you don't get it from the chat, don't you worry. Kristen will send you an email so that you won't miss out on the opportunity to give us evaluation. So thanks everybody for joining today. And thanks Kristen for doing such a good job on organizing, and Deirdre and Leslie for the talk. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.